His Excellency Amit Narang, Ambassador of India to the Sultanate of Oman, Madam Divya Narang, spouse of His Excellency the Ambassador, Mr. Swagat Pani, our esteemed guest speaker of the day, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good evening to one and all. On behalf of Embassy of India, it is my privilege to welcome you this evening to the 6th lecture of our landmark series, From MANDVI to Muscat, Indian Community and the Shared History of India and Oman. As we begin today's event, I kindly invite His Excellency Amit Narang, Ambassador of India to the Sultanate of Oman, to address the audience.
Good evening, Namaskar, Assalamu Alaikum, and welcome once again to the Indian Embassy. We are delighted to have all of you joining us for the 6th lecture in this series. And the good thing is that we are about to end. We have 2 more lectures to go after this, one in April and one in May, and then we finish this series. And hopefully then we'll start working to put all this together in a book, which, inshallah, we will release in sometime in June. The past few lectures of this series has seen a very eclectic mix of speakers, and many of you have been a part of that journey. I realized today, because of Ramadan, we have some Omani friends who haven't been able to join us. Hopefully they will be on their way. But we have heard from families, we have heard from family histories, we have heard from professor in India, we had a professor coming in from Sharjah. But today we have I must say, a very special speaker, a different speaker. Mr. Swagat Pani, who is joining us all the way from Michigan. And he's an anthropologist. And I was chatting with him, and we ended up sharing a lot of interests together in cultures and languages. And he has done work, and I should say in present continuous, is working on several interesting areas of the Gulf. And today he will be talking to us about the currency and how that has been a part of the exchange of cultures, if I may say, between India and Oman particularly. So we welcome you, Swagat, and we look forward to hearing from you. We are also very happy and grateful that today Amit has joined us from the Naranji Hirji family. Sudhir Bhai is here, of course, to make sure that he says correct things in the presentation. But very important, and I am grateful to both Sudhir Bhai and Amit Bhai for making this effort to talk about your family. That is a very important part of the oral history that we are trying to compile. And of course today we don't have him yet, but I must mention we will have a presentation by Dr. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲. So once somebody was asking me that this it is called MANDVI to Muscat, so it must be the history of the Kachchi community in Oman, but that is not the case. The term MANDVI to Muscat is more allegorical. It sounds good, but it could well have been, Surat to Sur or some such thing. The idea is to basically connect and see the history of India and Oman together, where I thought MANDVI was, in a sense, most representative of that aspect, but it is definitely not linked or not limited to Gujarat alone. Today, Dr. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲 will talk about a very esteemed personality and history of India-Oman through the eyes of somebody who came from Bihar. And hopefully in the coming lectures, we will also have somebody coming and talking to us from the perspective of the Malayali history, people coming from Kerala. That's again a very important part of this history. So saying that, I once again welcome everybody for this lecture series, and I am definitely looking forward to the 3 very interesting perspectives tonight. Thank you very much for joining us, and please stay back for dinner that will be served after the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Our esteemed speaker of the day, Mr. Swagat Pani, will be sharing his lecture on the topic Before Internationalization, Histories of the Indian Rupee in Oman and the Gulf region. Swagat Pani is an anthropologist and historian pursuing his doctoral degree in University of Michigan. His research Research interests include histories of banking and currency infrastructures and anthropological theories of money. Prior to University of Michigan, Mr. Swagat obtained degrees in anthropology and Middle Eastern and South Asian studies from the St. Anthony's College, University of Oxford, and from Columbia University in New York, and conducted ethnographic fieldwork in Egypt. Without further ado, may I kindly request Mr. Swagat Pani to deliver the lecture.
Dear all, good evening and thank you for being here on a weekend. I'm sure you could have been in other places at this time, but you chose to come here and be part of this lecture, and for this, I thank you. In some ways, I hope this is less a lecture and more of a space that sparks a vibrant discussion on the histories of currencies in Oman, but also the Gulf region, broadly speaking. In particular, my focus is on the histories of Rupee in the region. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Embassy of India in Oman for organizing this lecture and for providing me with the opportunity to present as a part of series of lectures on the shared history between India and Oman. I would like to thank Shri 𝗟𝗰𝗁𝗁𝗁, Ambassador of India to the Sultanate of Oman, for making this possible. In particular, I would also like to thank Mr. Anup Bijli, Second Secretary of the Embassy, as well as Professor Sandhya Rao Mehta of the Sultan Qaboos University for helping me with everything relating to the lecture, from the conception of the title of this work to the finish. I also like to acknowledge the works of other anthropologists and historians whose work I draw upon and who I quote in the slides. Last but not the least, I would like to dedicate this talk to the Ratansi Purushottam family, and in particular Mr. Vimal Purecha, Mrs. Naina Purecha, and their son Dhruv. From my very first visit to Oman years ago, I have had the pleasure of knowing the Purecha family, and I would like to thank them for sharing with me their extensive knowledge of the Indian community in Oman. I have shared many an evening in their enlightening and generous company, and I'm always grateful to them for this. Before I begin, I would like to note that my presentation relies on a variety of sources and methodologies. These include ethnography, historical archives, numismatics, oral histories, biographies, publications of central banks, newspaper reports, travelogues and memoirs, works of other anthropologists and historians. The kind of method that we adopt determines the perspective we have. I am an anthropologist and historian, and it is through an anthropological and historical prism that I look at this issue. I recognize that the economists, for example, could approach the same issue in a very different way. I would also like to note that this is a vast and complex histories, and there are multiple ways to narrate this history. Given that my presentation is supposed to be for about 40 minutes, I'll only touch on a few instances and moments in this history. I hope, even though the topics that I touch on and the time periods are vast and the personalities are many, and we only get like little glimpses of this, I hope this presentation serves as a launchpad for further discussions and future explorations. The first thing that I would like to reflect on is the scales of analysis. This presentation also engages with different scales apart from different personalities, different kinds of material and archives. It also engages with different scales of analysis. And the French historian Fernand Braudel once said, history may be divided into three movements: what moves rapidly, what moves slowly, and what appears not to move at all. For Braudel, the individual appears to hardly matter, since our individual lifespans are just specks in the ocean of time. This feeling is even more accentuated in cities like Muscat or Delhi or Istanbul with rich histories. I once had a friend of mine in Istanbul who told me, we have a long history from, Constantine through the Ottomans to the present. How do we matter? Do we matter? Like, there is such a long history, and you get the same sense in Muscat too. But nonetheless, despite this feeling of seeming individual insignificance, the question is, can we bridge the inner world of subjective experience and the outer objective world of epochal historical events? So these are some of the scales that I offer to think through this history. To explore if this is possible, that is, exploring the link between the inner subjective experience and the outer objective world, I will try to move between different scales and time frames. These include, at the largest level, the flows of bullions, coins, and notes across the globe. At like a smaller scale is the inter- and intra-regional histories of trade within the Indian Ocean. At even a smaller scale than the region, we have the bounds of a state within this region and the kinds of policies that are enacted, the kinds of laws that are enacted, or the kinds of coinage that is produced. And my focus is primarily coinage. And lastly, the domain of personal experience, which is biographies, memoirs, and travelogue. Since I am necessarily not per se a historian of Oman, but more broadly speaking, an anthropologist and historian of the globe, I will always try to sort of relate some of these changes to the larger patterns and movements and flows. And so I beg your indulgence for that, because the histories of the families would be presented by other people. So my specialty is mostly the political economy and focus on political economy. So I hope you indulge me in this. And this is a slightly different perspective. So I have few propositions to make at the outset of this presentation, and I would like to examine these 4 propositions. I am laying these propositions out right from the beginning, just in case. I know how I am with time, and sometimes I don't have time when I finish, and so I rush through it, so I just lay it out here in the very beginning. My first proposition is this: the world is international in particular ways because of the rupee. This is palpable if one considers histories of bullion and specie flows leading to the present moment. My second proposition is that we locate what I call the early India-Britain-Oman relationship within these bullion and specie flows. My third proposition is this: that currency infrastructures are overlaid on prior infrastructures and flows of finance, and the Banyan merchants were agents of widespread dispersal and internationalization of currencies in imperial and trans-imperial space and in an age before nations. Hence, perhaps, because we are talking mostly of imperial and trans-imperial space, perhaps the word international is a misnomer, but it nonetheless conveys what I want to communicate about their role. My last proposition is this: that numismatics can tell us interesting things about the histories of rupees, but it has its limitations as well. Biographical, literary, archival, and anthropological approaches can help us explore currencies and histories of rupees in ways that numismatics cannot. Taking a composite approach can help us gain a multidimensional understanding of histories of rupees in the region. So I begin with my first proposition. In its interdepartmental group IDG report on internationalization of the Indian rupee, the Reserve Bank of India asks, can the rupee become an international currency, and what steps need to be taken to internationalize it? Recent examples of this internationalization of rupee include the rupee dirham trade with UAE, rupee trade with Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, experiments of a similar kind with Russia, and so on. There have also been reports of early explorations of possible rupee trade with Oman, and many challenges this presents. It is within this particular context of RBI's question, can the rupee become an international currency, and how do we internationalize it? As a historian, I kind of experience a cognitive dissonance, because for me, like when I look at history, the rupee has, for the most part, always been international. And so I start with this proposition, the first proposition, that the world is international in particular ways because of the rupee. And you will see this when one considers histories of bullion and specie flows leading to the present moment. I know that most histories of the Indian Ocean technically start, with the Indian Ocean and the monsoon winds, but I'm going to sort of expand it and sort of look at the broader picture and try to narrow it further as I go. And so I hope you indulge me in this broadening. This slide has three paintings. One is the equestrian portrait of Emperor Shah Jahan. The other is like the Ming dynasty junk that sailed the Indian Ocean in the 15th century. And last, a painting of a silver mine in Potosi in current-day Bolivia. What exactly is the relationship between these three entities, that is the Ming dynasty, the Mughal Empire, and the Potosi mines? Essentially, the silver mines in the so-called New World were the primary producers of silver and produced nearly 60% of world silver in the second half of the 16th century. On the other hand, the Mughal and Ming states, with a large population base paying taxes in silver, were actually silver's primary consumers. This slide shows us the movement of silver across the globe, from the producers to the consumers of silver, with the Europe and European East India companies acting as its intermediaries. You can see two sets of arrows. One is the white one, the other one is the blue one. And the white arrows are ones of Spanish treasure fleets, which were called Flota de la Plata. And the blue ones are routes of the Portuguese. But like the Portuguese, companies like English and Dusty East India companies also transported silver from Europe, where it had really low value, to places like India and China, where it had really high value. This drainage of silver from Europe to India to purchase commodities and luxuries was extensively commented upon by many, including Master of the Mint to the English crown, Sir Isaac Newton. The English, for example, tried their best to stem this flow by trying to sell products that no one wanted in Asia. You can see that these pathetic attempts, like the British would sail up along the coast of China or even India, trying to sell woolen clothing that nobody really wanted, because what they wanted to do is they didn't want to bring their treasure to buy commodities, but rather sell commodities so that they can use that money to buy what they wanted from India and China. And this remained a problem for centuries until something changed. Now the question is, what exactly changed? And so what changed? To cut a long story short, the English East India Company obtained the Diwani rights over the province of Bengal. For the first time, it made money through taxation rather than just selling commodities. But how to remit? The question for the English East India Company was how to remit massive amounts of taxes paid in silver Sikka rupees in Bengal to company headquarters in London. There were initial experiments with shipping silver to China to purchase tea, porcelain, and all of that failed. Why? Because so much silver was drained from the province of Bengal that people had no more silver to pay taxes in subsequent years. The growing and shipment of opium instead of silver to pay for Chinese tea solved the problem. Yet, English East India Company overestimated the demand for tea in England, and the company's warehouses were stocked to the ceiling with tea that could never be sold. The British government rightly surmised that given the massive credit chains that linked the company to the larger British economy, the company was too big to fail. This tea was then shipped to the American colonies and exempt from paying taxes, causing resentment among American colonials. So what basically unites the Battle of Plassey, Chinese opium smokers, and the Boston Tea Party? Now you can begin to see the contours of this argument. What unites all of this is the problem of remitting silver, sikka, rupees. It is in this sense that the world is international in particular ways because of the rupee, because it mediated many epochal events. This is not the only instance that demonstrates that the world is international in particular ways because of the rupee. For example, some of the foundational studies in the discipline of economics is based on study of flows of the rupee. For example, John Maynard Keynes' Indian Currency and Finance is a good example. Similarly, there are studies of links between the rupee and the gold standard, or the flow of Indian gold from the British to the US post-World War II as a part of debt settlement between Britain and the US. And here is my next proposition. It is within this context, I think, that we locate what I call the early Britain, Oman, India triadic relationship within these bullion flows. And so there are a couple of perspectives that are examples that kind of illustrate this. One is the perspectives on the British-Oman Treaty of 1798. There are various perspectives have been offered for the motivations behind signing of the Britain and Oman Treaty of 1798. Dr. Reda Bakr, who gave the keynote address for this lecture series, has an excellent account of this, and I highly recommend if anybody is interested to read that, and he has a really good account of this process. From Syed Sultan bin Ahmad's perspective, a variety of reasons have been given, such as the Wahhabi incursions into Omani territory, the defeat of Tipu Sultan, and the impact on the Muscat-Mysore trade. Syed Sultan seeking British help in dealing with regional rivalries, and so on. From the British perspective, the motivations such as keeping French at bay, prevention of French military and commercial expansion, the Napoleonic Wars, attacks on British shipping, also protection of the Gulf and Persia trade, or protection of the Bombay-Basra shipping route and the overland route from Basra are some of the factors that have been emphasized. But I think the focus on trade alone does not explain the issue. The East India companies, like companies of today, was dealing with movement of finance and particular cash problems. What do I mean by that is, for example, they would have Diwani revenues from Bengal, but they would send some of the silver would be stuck in wars in the Carnatic in the presidency of, in Madras. And so there was like problems in moving the silver across different branches of the company, or one part of the company could be rich and another part could be like poor, and people would write letters to each other and saying, hey, we don't have money in London, when will you send the next installment of like remittance? And so there was all these kinds of problems that you have with contemporary corporations in dealing with distribution of finances within different branches. One of the ways that the company devised with the problem was to diversify its portfolio through commodities passing through Gulf. Essentially, it is to say it is too risky for us to buy just tea or remit all the revenues through China, and therefore we need other modalities to invest in other places so that we can sort of distribute our risk. And so, hence, this was also about protecting modalities of tax revenues back to London. So at least from the British perspective or the English East India Company, the British India Oman triad can be also understood in terms of the prism of remittance of silver from the subcontinent, at least in the time period for which we are talking about it. Another example, and this is like a post-East India Company moment, and this is also interesting because the East India Company has come to an end, 1858, and then you have the British Crown taking over essentially all the possessions of East India Company. So there is another example that demonstrates this, and this is the British investment in telegraphic infrastructure in the region, such as on the Telegraph Island in Musandam province, post the 1857 rebellion. And again, this was done to protect trade, remittances, and access to Indian markets for its goods. Hence, it is my contention that it is not just the monsoon winds and the waves of the sea that must be taken as a substratum to think through this history, but also the ebbs and flows of precious metal, bills of exchange, and finances. However, the problem is, where do we begin? In fact, the Oman-India bullion and specie flows do not begin with the India-British-Oman triad, but in fact preceded by many centuries. Understanding this is important to locate the rupee in a proper historical context. This leads me to my third proposition, which is that the currency infrastructures are overlaid on prior infrastructures and flows of finance. And the Banyan merchants were agents of widespread dispersal of currencies in imperial and trans-imperial spaces and in an age before nations. To understand this better, we need to take a brief detour into the early currency histories in the Oman region itself. Prior to the coming of Islam, Sasanian silver dirhams circulated in the region through taxes, but the sadaqat, or the poor taxes, appear to have still been paid in kind. While barter coins, while gold coins were part of cargoes from ships in India and China, lot of exchange happened through barter. One of the earliest Islamic coins is from the year 81st Hijri or 780, which is an Umayyad coin bearing the name Oman. In fact, one of the earliest mints in the region was in Oman. I have taken the image of the slide as well as some of these others from a fantastic book published by the Central Bank of Oman titled Tarikh al-Nuqud fi Sultanat Oman, al-Bank al-Markazi al-Omani, Muscat, 1990. The coin bears the inscription La ilaha illallah wahad la sharika lahu. Bismillah duriba heda al-dirham bi aman fi sanat ahda wa tamanin aw tasain. So basically, this translates to there is no God but God, and He's unique and no associate with Him. In the name of God, this was struck in Oman in the year 81, though I don't fully understand the second part of it, which is the aw tasain part of it, what that means. If anybody has idea about what that could mean, please let me know. But what this essentially just shows is that we cannot just think of this movement as starting with the British or, like the India-British-Oman triad. There were a variety of coins circulating in this region, variety of coins, varieties of hoards, varieties of cash. Some of these include, for example, the Sina hoard. There is the Chinese copper cash, Florentine gold florin, there is the Venetian gold ducat, there is the Rasulid dirham, long silver larine, Mahmudis, Spanish silver from the New World, coins of three great empires, that is the Ottomans, the Mughals, and the Safavids, the Rupee, the Maria Theresa thaler, and so on and so forth. And this shows the sort of the variety of coins that were circulating in the region. This is again from the book by the Central Bank of Oman. And what all of this demonstrates is that there is too much complexity, I think, going on here for us to, I'm not going to go into the details of all the coins that were circulating in the region and all the complexity of it, except to say certain broad things that I think are important to say, which is this, that coins can form a part of the historical record, and coins are durable as opposed to other medium, such as parchment, paper, leaves, and so on. Coins are usually a sign of sovereignty of the ruler and the administrative power structure. For example, in some of the early coins, you see the name of the caliph, the mint in which the coin was minted, the name of the governor, and so on. It was also a form of communication between the ruler and the ruled. And absence or presence of particular caliphs or governors actually show that perhaps there was recognition of particular caliphs or lack thereof. There is also signs of occupying powers. For example, in the coin record, you will have like new coins, for like a 4 or 5 year period that show like some other power has come into the region, and so on and so forth. And again, you can surmise different things based on if a coin is single or in a hoard. And this concerns questions about usage, whether it is widely circulated or whether it is not so widely circulated, and so on and so forth. That is just the broad history, but for our purpose, to narrow on our proposition, which we started with, I'm going to focus on one particular moment. This is basically to look at the currency proposition, that currency infrastructures are overlaid on one another, and the role of Banyan merchants. I'll focus on one particular important form of exchange, and this is the trade in Bahri horses, or what we call like the horses from the sea. I will just read one excerpt from the Travels of Marco Polo, but essentially similar information is relayed also by the Ilkhanid historians and viziers, attesting to the importance of places like Kalhad and Sohar to the export of horses to the Indian subcontinent. For example, Marco Polo says, I can also tell you that many fine charges are transported to India from the city, Kalhad, earning the merchants handsome profits. For you should know that the number of superb horses shipped to India from this place and others I have mentioned is very great, so great as to be almost past reckoning. What is important for our purpose is that the horse trade with India is a source of movement of substantial specie and bullion from India that continues into the Mughal period. The question is, who is handling this trade, and through whom does substantial amount of specie and bullion flow? We know, for example, that Sultan bin Saif al-Yarubi, 1649 to 79, had Indian agents in Gujarat managing supplies of horses in the Indian subcontinent. Substantial specie and coins flowed between Oman and India, mediated by Gujarati Banyans. This pattern of Banyan merchants mediating substantial currency flows continues into the Portuguese times, into the reign of the Yarubis, into the 19th century, when customs is farmed out to merchants from Gujarat, both in Muscat and Zanzibar. Hence, it is safe to say that through time, Banyans were important agents for dispersal of specie and a variety of currency, including silver rupees, in inter-imperial and trans-imperial space. And it is to be noted that they were circulating not just silver rupees, but they were dealing with a variety of coinage and currency. In other words, they were the agents of internationalizing currency even before the era of nations. Whatever be the superstructures or imperial structures, the expertise of the Gujarati merchants is crucial and vital to understanding this history. And I would like to call this process as layering, that whatever be the superstructure that comes, which you call it the Portuguese or the British or whatnot, the expertise of Gujarati merchants is absolutely vital in mediating particular exchanges. And we see this pattern continuing even into the 20th century. This layering continues into the 20th century. For example, the Shrafs, who were often translated as like native bankers or money exchangers, they continue to play an important role in modern banking. In fact, some of them as employees of European and British banks, because the European and British employees do not have sufficient expertise and local knowledge of the kinds of processes, the kinds of people, if a person is creditworthy or not, or if money can be lent to some person or not. And they don't have that local knowledge, and that is being mediated by the Shrafs, who are in it for their own reason. The European banks, for example, some of the literature on banking would suggest that there is a broad difference between modern banking or what is called like native practices. But in fact, some historians of the Indian Ocean, they have shown that there is a continued role and importance of local practices. One such practice is like the badli or the forward contract to make profit, and the European banks use these practices to make profit. And we also see this, at least in the case of Oman, the continued role, the importance of Khimji Ramdas, for example, in providing credit to smaller firms, despite official banking monopoly of the Imperial Bank of Iran. So you can see that kind of layering, kind of like expertise that the merchants have that the Europeans do not necessarily have. But it is not just, I think that we are talking about, expertise. We are also talking about, for example, ways of reckoning value. And for example, how do you reckon the value of the cost of Nizwa Fort? And this was built by Sultan bin Saif al-Yarubi, and it basically says, وهو مشروع تقول كتب التاريخ أنه كلف لكوك من الذهب الفضة وهذه المعلومات قيمة لأن اللاك هو وحدة حساب هندية تساوي 100,000 ربية. So essentially, like even the value of items, the value is measured in Indian lakh, for example. It's an Indian way of denominating value. And so, for example, and this is from the Tariq al-Nukud fi Sultanat Oman, which I again say is like an excellent book, and if anybody is interested should actually read the book. And I found it so fascinating, this publication by the Central Bank of Oman. And it is so rich and textured and layered. And so this clearly indicates that there are forms of valuation that are coming from the Indian subcontinent that are used to measure things, and you can see that relationship here as well. Now, when we come back, so I'm again moving across time and scale, and I apologize, I won't have time to cover all the details, and I don't remember all the details either, so, this is not going to be like a continuous history, but just a little bit of fragments from here and there. But it is essentially into this rich world that the English East India Company, or EIC coinage, slowly replaced Mughal coinage and was also increasingly used in certain markets of Oman. Apart from the sort of Mughal coinage that was taken over by the English East India Company, there was also British sovereigns, and half sovereigns were also common in Oman. The English East India coinage, this is interesting, and this refers to again the process of layering that we were talking about. And this can be seen now not in terms of expertise of people, but in terms of coinage, that the English East India coinage still carried Mughal inscriptions. Now, this is not necessarily linked to acknowledging sovereignty, but it allows for easy recognition by people of certain kinds of coinage, allowing for freer circulation. So these are processes that sort of precede even the English East India Company that it is trying to inject itself into. And 1835, for example, is a moment when English East India Company introduced uniform coinage for its territories, consisting of gold muhr, silver rupees, half rupees, quarter rupees, copper annas, and so forth. And this coinage is in effect till 1858, when it is replaced by the coins of British India. One thing to note in this context, and historians have remarked upon it, is that despite the best efforts of the English East India Company, it was never able to sort of enforce uniform coinage across its provinces wherever it was. It was only when British India came, then there was a certain degree of success in that. And then these are moving on to from the company era to the British India coins and rupees in Oman. It is interesting to note that massive quantities of silver rupees issued by mints of Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta were circulating also in Oman. Initially, a frozen date of 1862 was chosen, and this frozen date remained from 1862 to 1874, similar to the frozen date of Maria Theresa Thaler for 1780. And it is also said that successors of Said bin Sultan increasingly resorted to Indian coins to meet currency needs and became de facto coins of Muscat. There were also quarter anna paisa and 1/12 anna ghazi. But of course, the puzzle, and I'll come to this, is the Maria Theresa Thaler on the Dhofar coast, interior of Oman. And there is the other puzzle that I think I have to understand this better, is that there is a lot of Indian copper coins that are circulating. This is a small change everywhere across different provinces. But the question is, like, how were they used? How were they mediating daily routine transactions. I don't fully understand that, and that is something that I hope to understand better later. But it's not just the question of Oman. There is also, for example, the currency used in Zanzibar, and this was like a hybrid Indian-Spanish system. So this was from the time of Syed Bargash, and it was originally based on the Egyptian currency system. As usual, there is minimal gold and silver coins, but there was a monetary fusion, which is that the European or the Spanish real system was mixed with the Indian system of paisa. And most of this copper paisa were in fact minted in a Birmingham mint, and the government of Zanzibar was actually mimicking coinage practices of British East Africa Company in Mombasa. Coins were also struck on the basis of the Indian system of silver rupees, half rupees, quarter rupees, 2 annas, copper paisa. And in 1908, government of Zanzibar issued 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 and 500 rupees. And these are some of the most rare notes in the world. And one of my friends who is a Shraf in Bombay actually told me whenever I travel to Zanzibar to keep an eye for these notes, because he says these are like so precious, but you should never tell people how valuable they are, because if you tell them how valuable it is, then you're going to have to pay a premium. So for anybody who doesn't know, you should buy it from them. But unfortunately, Zanzibari weather, like most of it is worn out, and I think most people know the value of these notes. And so that's a side anecdote from Bombay. But one of the most interesting, and this is a puzzle for me, and I don't fully understand it better, and those of you who know better about this should, please speak about this, I find this one of the Maria Theresa thaler to be one of the most interesting currencies in the world and in circulation. It circulates in variety of places. It circulates in interior of Oman, on the Dhofar coast, the Yemen, Western Arabia, including Hijaz, East Africa. It is struck in the name of Maria Theresa, 1740 to 1780, the Archduchess of Austria. And even the most interesting part is that even after her death in 1780, the Austrian mint kept minting coins with frozen dates of 1780, and this came to be known as Real Franci in the region. This is perhaps the most important transnational currency in region, including for trade. But what is its relationship with the rupee, and what kinds of differentiation, what was it mediating that the rupee was not, or vice versa? Those of you who might know more about that can please talk about Maria Theresa thaler. It would be fascinating for me to hear. But one thing that I have heard about the Maria Theresa thaler is like all the interesting anecdotes that are talked about it. For example, there is the anecdote that when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, he actually took the dice of the Maria Theresa thaler and started minting it for circulation within Ethiopia. But then once the occupation was sort of like complete, he wanted to change over to the Italian currency. But then the British, in order to sort of challenge Mussolini, they started actually manufacturing their own sort of Maria Theresa thaler and flooding the market. And one of the people who was doing that was Antonin Bess, who was a French merchant from operating in Aden. And what is most interesting thing is he made a lot of money shipping Maria Theresa thaler across into Abyssinia, and then lot of this profit was invested in actually funding a college in Oxford called St. Anthony's College, and that happens to be my alma mater. And so this is a way in which different things like come together, and like it's weird, but that's what happens. And there is another interesting account of the Maria Theresa thaler, but I'll reserve it for later. But I can keep going on and on about currency, but I think this will be a never-ending process, so I will just sort of shift gear to rupees and biographies. And this is important because it is one thing to, and this is the part that I was talking about, the Brodelian part, like you have this massive flows of coins, of bullion. On the other end of it, you have individual biographies, like where do they mesh, where do they meet, how do they sort of intersect with each other? And so this is just a brief attempt at it. This is not the only way to do it. There are probably the Indian merchant community here can say how that sort of intersected with their biographies. But the way in which it intersects with biographies in the most sort of mundane ways. It's so interesting. For example, this is, I think, from 1798. And I just wanted to show you the archival material. This is what I do. This is what it looks like. This is what my work sometimes looks like. Like a company's broker at Muscat is allowed a salary of 100 rupees per month. And that's a lot of money. Like, I don't think my grandfather was making as much even in the 20th, perhaps few annas per month. And so it's so interesting. In the other sort of material, I think that is from 1810 or 1808, I can't see, 1810. So the Mr. Buns, who was appointed as the resident of Muscat, is hereby allotted 150 rupees per mensum, I think, for maintenance of a yacht. And so this is how it sort of intersects with ordinary lives. It's just mundane things. It's not about big processes, remittances, China and Oman or India or whatever, but it's just like very mundane, very ordinary. And the other way in which, for example, it intersects with lives of people, and this is actually Sayyeda Salama bint Sayed, who was also known as Emily Roth. She was the youngest child of Sayed bin Sultan, and she married a German merchant by the name of Rudolf Heinrich Roth. I hope I'm saying it right. But she is the author of the Memoirs of Arabian Princess from Zanzibar. And here you can see how biographies can be used as a way to query ways in which currencies get embedded in particular lives. For example, she says in her biography, she says, "The newspaper spread the fictitious report that I went back to Germany in full possession of my inheritance, this amounting to the proceeds derived from the sale of 28 houses. I received not a single penny, my claims acknowledged as just even by the British Consul General, and that is saying a great deal, remain unsettled to this day. The stupendous figure of 6,000 rupees, which my opulent brother proffered as a total settlement, I declined with thanks." And then there is another part in her biography. She says, "Many an Arabian lady spends 500 silver dollars a year on cents." And then another part, she says, "Even the silver dollars in the treasury were sacrificed, they were melted into bullets." So the question that I think it's interesting when you look at biographies is, what is particular currency doing in a particular context? Like, why is a sort of inheritance, let's say, measured in rupees, or why is something else like talked about, like silver dollars are spent on cents? Or, you can query this in so many ways. I don't have answers to it. I'm just have more questions than I have answers. Or if there were silver dollars in the treasury, like where they stored in the form of, probably in dollars, and they were sacrificed and melted into bullets. It's so interesting when you look at it from the biographical perspective, because within the same period of time, her brother Majid, Sultan Syed Majid, was settling. There was a separation between Oman and Zanzibar, and from Zanzibar, Sultan Syed Majid in Zanzibar. On the other side, you have Sultan Syed Tuwaini. And they had the canning sort of agreement, which basically separated both the provinces, and said that Sultan Syed Majid had to actually pay 40,000 Maria Theresa thalers. So you can see that sort of distinction between like different currencies, like something coming in an agreement and a contract, something coming up in like a biography in different ways. And I really don't fully understand why certain things get measured in particular ways or not, but it's something interesting to note. There is also the sort of intersection of rupees and biographies, particularly, for example, with enslaved divers obtaining certificates of manumission from the British resident in Muscat. What I want to note here is that, and I think I have to say this because some of these archives as if appear that the British are sort of emancipating, and it is true, like slaves and whatnot. But in fact, one of the biggest beneficiaries of the slave trade was the British. Despite banning the slave trade in the early part of the 19th century, and they were chasing dhows and had agreements with Syed, and they were making a lot of money because primarily the plantations in the US were producing most of their cotton well into like the Civil War, 1860s. And a lot of this cotton was getting shipped to Liverpool for manufacturing textiles, and still they were the major beneficiary. So we take this with a pinch of salt, but nonetheless, it's interesting to see these narratives that are produced, that is, divers coming from part which is the crucial states, the Emirates and so forth, or Qatar or Kuwait, coming into Muscat seeking certificates of manumission. And I just read one of these sort of reports in which the ways in which the rupee figures in this narrative. And this is a statement made by Sayyid bin Khamis of Yankul, aged about 30 years, recorded on the 5th of November 1930. It says, "My native place is Yankul, a town in Sharqiya. 6 years ago, Hamad and Khalifa, whose father Hilal al-Alawi was then the Sheikh of Yankul, came to my house and asked me to give them my garden, which I have inherited from my father. I told them that my garden was not my own property, but my minor brothers had also a share in it. Then I did not comply with the request. They handcuffed me and confiscated all my property, and then sent me by two Bedouins of Daru named Nasir and Muhammad to Abu Dhabi for sale. The Bedouins sold me at Abu Dhabi to the mother of Sayyid bin Abdullah al-Yasi for 600 rupees. So you can see that this is such a probably a pivotal moment in this person's life, but the rupee figures in this narrative as a way to buy him as property. But that would be only, I'm not reading the full narrative, but that's only one part of the story. There is the other part of the story, for example, where rupee is a sort of instrument of emancipation, because here you can see, like in the part that I have highlighted below, I'm not reading it, but the part that I have highlighted, rupee figures here because it is used to pay the debts of an enslaved diver, whatever debts he owed to his nakhoda, or we call it now khuda in our language, but it's used to pay the debt and sort of free the diver. So it's not like rupee is just a sort of instrument of enslavement, but also emancipation in this different narratives, and you can look at it in sort of different ways. And now I will shift gears to a different part of the history, which is we are coming to the close of the sort of the influence of the rupee in the region, which was the Gulf rupee and the Hajj rupee. And you can see the different images from this, like the 1 rupee, the 100 rupee. The 100 rupee Gulf rupee is supposed to be very precious. Again, my Shraf friend in Bombay tells, if you find it somewhere, please let me know, it can be sold. So these are like really, and the reason why they're precious is they were just circulating for a limited period of time in many states from 1959 to 1970, but like a lot of states withdrew from the Gulf rupee even much earlier. And so there is an ethnographic snippet that I would like to relay here, which is kind of very interesting. And I met this person in a hotel in Chennai who tells me, and he was working in different Gulf states from the 1950s onwards, and he's retired now and sort of invested a lot of the money that he made in the Gulf in properties in Chennai. And he was telling me, that that for a few years in mid-20th century, the Indian rupee was an official currency of the Gulf states. And so this is one of the perspectives, but even in contemporary, there is another way in which it is valued. For example, in eBay, you can see like how these different things are being sold. Some, Gulf rupees are circulating for $650, some for $199, and so on and so forth. But what is interesting here is why this currency came into being, and I would like to sort of make a differentiation with histories of rupee that came earlier with this kind of process, because you can see this is all like different news items that were being published from the the 40s and the 50s, all talking about smuggling operations centered on Gulf. And even in the sort of news item from the right, you see the Sultan of Kuwait who is like baffled, and he's trying to like police and guard this smuggling activity. So one thing that is interesting, and I would like to make a note of this, is in prior histories of the rupee, you can see how it embedded itself in different processes, how it embedded itself in forms of valuation, how it was enabling different processes to continue, whereas this is kind of unique because it is trying to prevent something, and that is why this Gulf rupee was in fact printed not just to enable processes, but to prevent something. And so you get the record, this is the newspaper perspective, but then this is like the archival, sort of the RBI records have like a different story to tell and how they tell and narrate this history. And what is basically this interesting is that it was printed in 1959, it was called the external rupees, and the colors are different because it was circulating to differentiate it from what was circulating in India, and they were denominated, they were prefixed with Z, and the 1 rupee was red and the 5 rupee orange and so on and so forth, the 100 rupees green. And this was circulating across in Oman, crucial states, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. Within Oman, it apparently circulated mostly in the coastal region, and those of you who might have more knowledge on it can speak about it. And Muscat, since Maria Theresa thalers and British gold sovereigns still appear to be in wide circulation. Even though it is an official currency of many Gulf states, to what extent and for what purposes it was actually used and how it was in practice is something that I need to understand better. And reports suggest that it was used mostly as a small change and could also be refused for payments in practice because still Maria Theresa thaler and British sovereigns kind of ruled the day, perhaps. And so what is interesting is that it was created in response to gold smuggling, primarily centered in Bahrain and Kuwait. And so what was interesting about this process was that gold would be smuggled from these places and brought into India, where they would be sold for Indian currency, and Indian currency would be smuggled back into the Gulf region. And then because there was an agreement between these states and the government of India that the Indian rupee was convertible for pound sterling, a lot of this got deposited in the banks, and the banks would then deposit with the Reserve Bank of India, and the Reserve Bank of India had to pay sterling. And therefore there was like a leakage of foreign currency reserves of the Indian government. So the Indian government basically tried to stem this process by saying, let us make a separation between the notes that circulate in the Gulf region from the notes that basically circulate in the Indian subcontinent, and this is the way we do it. And therefore, the Reserve Bank of India Amendment Act was passed in 1959, which issued the special notes for circulation in the Gulf region. This was passed by the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha before presidential assent on May 5th, 1959. But these notes were not legal tender in India, but only in Gulf states. And then as you look at the archival records of the RBI, then you can see, we have solved this problem. This is like no more an issue of like leaking foreign currency reserves and so on. But what were the circumstances of the dissolution? I mean, this currency started to dissolve almost within a couple of years after its creation, and this happened, with like a lot of states becoming independent from the UK, a lot of states preferring sort of, their own national currencies and national central banks. And the first state to create and print its own national currency was actually Kuwait, with its Kuwaiti dinar on 1st April 1961. This is just 2 years after the creation of the Gulf rupee. This was then followed by Bahrain 4 years later in 16 October 1965. And then Indian government basically announces that it will stop conversion of Indian coins repatriated from Gulf states into pound sterling. And there is also an agreement with the government of Bahrain saying that for the repatriation of all the Gulf rupees in exchange for pound sterling, they would pay either 1/3 of the liability or 2 million pounds immediately, and the rest would be paid over a 10-year period. And the government of Bahrain also starts to allow its coins to be used by other Gulf states in 1966. And 1966 is a sort of a pivotal year because that's also the time when the Indian rupee gets devalued for a variety of reasons. And so that puts a lot of pressure because the value of the rupees that these countries hold is no more as valuable as it was before. And then there is also the monetary union between Qatar and Dubai, and there is the introduction of the Qatar and Dubai Riyal. And Saudi Riyals were also in circulation in Qatar and Dubai until Qatar and Dubai Riyals could be introduced. Abu Dhabi refused Saudi Riyals due to the boundary dispute, and this is another sort of one of those little things. But what happened is it appears that the Gulf rupee was apparently circulated to a limited extent in Muscat, probably not even in the interior, until May of 1970 as one of the principal currencies of trade. Muscat and Oman still had a variety of currencies like the Maria Theresa thaler, local baizas, dinars of Kuwait and Bahrain. So all of this was circulating in the region, and as I mentioned, the devaluation of the rupee caused an adverse impact on Gulf states. And leaders of the Gulf states tried obtaining guarantees from the Indian government through Great Britain since they stood to lose 4 million pounds sterling. The ruler of Qatar even suggested that it was Great Britain's responsibility since it had been responsible for usage of rupees in the region in the first place. But none of this came to pass, and finally the Gulf rupee finally exchanged with Riyal Saidi in Oman in 1970, and you can see the Riyal Saidi, I think is Riyal Saidi Wahad, Riyal Saidi Nisf, like the half and the one. And then Muscat and Oman was the final place where Gulf rupees actually apparently circulated. And there are sort of various ways to sort of understand, demise of currencies or demise of rupees, one way is to also look at novels, and this is by 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗲, which is the Sayyidat al-Qamar, which is translated as the celestial bodies in English, which I thought was a very, very interesting passage about the Maria Teresa thaler, and I think I should quote it. And it basically says, at the worst of the economic crisis, when a bag of rice imported from Calcutta or Madras cost 100 coins and Zarifa cost 20, these were the silver Maria Teresa coins which could not be faked because the silver was so pure. My father hoarded them, keeping 10 or 20 or 50 in the leather bag that he always knotted onto his belt. For a long time he had nothing but scorn for the paper reals that had since appeared, until he was forced to bow to their superior power. So it gives you like a very interesting insight, this tale of two currencies, but what happens with the Maria Teresa thaler, but not just what happens, but how it is experienced by people as memory and narrated. And of course, while that was happening, and this is a prior movement, but there are others who sort of also made profits from the falling values of Maria Teresa thaler. This was not in the period that 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗲 talks about, but like an earlier period after the war, where basically when the value of Maria Teresa thaler falls in the Gulf region, its value increases in London, and Ambani, Dhirubhai Ambani, who was operating in Aden, basically is able to collect a lot of this Maria Teresa thaler and then sends it to London and makes a small sum of profit, not unlike the boss he worked for, Antonin Bess, who also did similar kinds of deals, but the other way around with Italian Abyssinia and so on and so forth. And so I come to the last part, which is the not the novel, not the literary, but the ethnographic perspectives, and what can ethnographic perspective tell us, and how does one look at dollars and rupees from the deck of a dhow? And I wanted to tell a MANDVI story because this was pitched as a MANDVI to Muscat, so I want to tell the sort of the MANDVI and the Mundra port story of it, and I have juxtaposed the economist Barry Eichengreen's book on exorbitant privilege, which is the rise and fall of the dollar, and essentially there are many arguments he makes, but he says that the demise of the dollar has been told from the 1960s onwards, but it never actually happens because there are various processes from below that actually challenge people's demand for dollars and why people desire dollars. And so I wanted to juxtapose with that story because the ethnographic example again communicates that aspect of the complicated stories of why currencies rise or fall, or why people want particular currencies. And this, you can see this image is basically from the port of Mundra. You can see the dhow, and then the sacks of rice are being loaded onto this dhow, and this was just taken a few years back. And so this is a very interesting trade that basically goes from Mundra. There is no fixed way in which it goes. It could basically go from Mundra to Dubai and then go to Bosaso, come to Salalah and go back to MANDVI, or it could just go to Bosaso straight and come back. There are so many permutations and combinations of how this can work. There is also, like, for example, people who either rent who are basically like renting the boat, but there are also owners of boats who, sail this. And then their partners are usually Somalis who retain it for a particular period of time and ask them to go particular routes. But the essence of it, one of my interlocutors told me was, it's not just about, it's the process of converting rupees for more dollars for more rupees. So there is this desire for dollars mainly earned in places like Somalia. And the Oman part of the trade sometimes comes to Salalah, which is where you have the sort of the herds and cattle and whatnot, and the animals livestock coming into Salalah. And so this is in fact a very perilous trade, as you can see. I mean, like my interlocutor told me that nobody died in either of this, but you can see one of the things he shared with me was like a dhow on fire. So this chase for dollars, for more rupees for dollars, is actually a very risky process, and the image from below actually shows transportation of cars, essentially, I think second-hand cars from Dubai to Somalia, and this is actually a wreck. There again, nobody apparently died, but like it shows you what a risky process this is. But what you can see in this ethnographic example is that the process of dollarization and de-dollarization that we talk about in policy documents works in a very different way when you look at it from ground up. What happens to dollars, what happens to rupees, and how this fits in with the larger sort of currency histories that have come in the region. So I hope I have touched on different elements of, like the history, different parts, and I know it's not very satisfying. I've never gone into one particular thing, but I just wanted to give a sense of how I look at it as an anthropologist, as a historian. It's a complex process. I am interested in understanding the dollar, but in order to understand the dollar, I need to understand everything that came before it. And so that is my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Swagatji, for enlightening us with a very interesting lecture. May I now welcome Mr. Amit Sampath to narrate the history of the Naranji Hirji family.
Your Excellency, Divya Naranji, thank you so much for this opportunity, distinguished guests, my family, and people of the community. It's actually an honor to be able to showcase our family's history in Oman, which is spanning over 118 years this year. Today I'll be talking about when I was asked to do this presentation. It was very difficult to choose what I wanted to showcase because I can't really put 118 years within 15 minutes. So I tried to do something different. I tried to do something about the family, something about the transition in Oman, and I did a lot of different sort of key elements that we have, treasures and possessions that we have within the family. And I hope that you enjoy what we have put together for you today. Okay, so here we go. Just to start off with the beginning of Naranji Hirji himself. So Naranji Hirji is not a company, it's a person. It's my great-grandfather. And the beginning, we are not very clear in terms of why Naranji Hirji chose to leave MANDVI and come to Oman. We are still researching on all of this. We've done many sort of stories about the trade route, the slavery route. Even if you actually get onto a dhow from Mandvi and sail straight in a straight line across, you'll actually end up at Sur, which is where most traders started in Oman. We truly believe that it was actually the trade route. If you actually get onto a ship, it'll take you up into Karachi, Pani, 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲, and then down into the Oman coast, and then further down into Zanzibar. So why did Naranji Hirji come into Oman? We, of course, an opportunist looking for a better life, came here, started off as a broker, finding odd jobs to survive, learned the trade slowly over the years, and then finally set up his own business. This also laid the foundation of who we are today. We still carry the same passion of driving ourselves into new businesses, looking for new opportunities, and over 4 generations now, we continue to grow. The person that you see in the picture here is not actually Naranji Hirji himself, but it's amazing what artificial intelligence can do. And when I actually asked ChatGPT to create a image for me of a man from MANDVI getting onto a dhow and landing onto the shores of Oman. This was exactly the image that it came out with. So it actually showcases Oman, it showcases a dhow, and it showcases the attire that people were actually wearing back in the day. It was quite amazing. I would also, so Naranji Hirji did come here, start off with growing into building a business and a family, etc. But unfortunately, he had a very short lifespan. He passed away at the age of 43. What we did, and I'm going to jump forward and back within the whole presentation because obviously I'm trying to get in a lot of different perspectives into this. But what we did when we completed 100 years of our existence in Oman, we created a corporate video which was also showcasing a little bit of Naranji Hirji and what we've done over the years. And I'd just like to share a very small 3-minute part of that video for you right now before we carry on.
Welcome to Naranji Hirji. This is a story of an enterprise that evolved through telling times. Founded by a man more than a century ago who had a vision and a purpose. Foundation of Naranji Hirji and Company, LLC, Mr. Naranji Hirji himself, located at the tip of the Arabian Peninsula, Oman, has always been accessible to anyone coming from the east. In the year 1905, Mr. Naranji Hirji moved from the small town of MANDVI in Kutch, India to Oman. At a time when Oman was depending on imports of every commodity, Naranji saw an opportunity in imports of commodities such as rice, sugar, tea and coffee. An adventurous person and opportunist, he did not let the opportunity go by. As a humble beginning, Naranji's first job in Oman was as a broker, as he had limited resources on his own. Soon, he gained knowledge and experience to start his own business. Pioneer started importing everything that was in demand, which consisted of mainly food items and commodities, which even today is a core business of Naranji Hirji. As he established his brokerage business, Naranji started to gain the trust of the Omani people since they knew he was to stay and offer them a service. This was the first step taken towards getting the confidence of various people in Oman, the trade, the customers, the business community, the lenders and the people of Oman. Until this day, Naranji Hirji as a company maintains that trust and reputation in Oman. The first Naranji Hirji office was established in the old Muscat city. This was in the vicinity of the Muscat Palace with the office on the ground floor and residence on the first floor with a warehouse in the adjacent building. This was also their first showroom where customers could walk in and view the products. For members of the Naranji Hirji family, Muscat in Oman is home. This is where the company was established and grew along with the nation.
So moving forward, I just want to sort of give you a little perspective in terms of what the Naranji Hirji family is. Though we are called the Naranji Hirji family, we're actually the 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲 Naranji family, and I'll explain to you why. So Naranji Hirji himself had 4 children, 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲, and 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲. And the lineage that we are in Oman today is actually the 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗄, the youngest son of Naranji. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗄 had 6 children, Vimla and Jaswanti. Jaswanti you would all here fondly know as Asha Khimji. She's married to Ajit Khimji. Vimla is married to Mahesh Jasani, and she lives in India. And then we have the four sons, Mahendra, Sudhir, Mahesh, and Narendra, also fondly known as Naru. And those are the four families that actually grew up in Oman. Mahendra married to Mala, their son Samir, who is currently in the business, and his family, his wife Sona, and his children Sanil and Simran. Manjari, who lives in Mumbai, is married to Kushal. Sudhir, who is with us right now, and Devyani, my mother. My elder sister MANDVI, who's married to Mohan, and they have two daughters, Priyanka and Anushka. Myself and my wife Janki, and our two kids, Krish and Tia. And with Mahesh and Mayuri, there is two children, Brinda and Devang. Brinda is married to Rajiv with a boy and a girl, and Devang is married to Aishwarya, who have a little daughter, Akshara. Naru and Smita have two kids, Nikhil and Rajit. Nikhil is married to Minita, and their kids, Mahir and Mirari, are also in Muscat. So this is what we're going to be talking about in terms of the Naranji Hirji family that represents the company or the group in Oman today. Here's where I get to embarrass my parents. So here's the few interesting photographs that we had of the children. So as you can see, there is Mahendra and Sudhir up there, and Mahesh and Naru. And you will actually find that in most of the photographs that we have, the same combination always existed for some reason. So these two would always take a photo together, and these two would always be together in a photograph. You have all the four boys there, which was a photograph taken in Oman. And then you have all the six siblings at the bottom, which was a very rare photo that we have within the family of the six siblings. I'd also like to take you back a little bit now in terms of the early stages of Oman. And this was a letter that was written by a family member in the year 1931, which was actually written in pencil, posted from MANDVI, arrived in Muscat 4 days later. It actually tells you how efficient the postal service used to be back in the day. And the letter had and for those who can actually read Gujarati, it had a very basic address. It actually didn't even have a street name. It just actually said whose house or whose sort of area. And it was perfectly delivered, and both stamps of when it was posted and when it actually arrived are there. So it was mentioned the dates there on the 21st of November and the 24th of November 1931 when it arrived in Oman as well. I cannot. That, right. Something else that I would like to highlight in terms of how life used to be back in the day. Though we were away from India, the communities lived in very similar circumstances, very similar traditions, very similar cultures in Oman as well. So it was basically a shift of place, but not a shift of culture. And the two photos that you see here is of Navratri being celebrated, and back then only by the women and the children. So you don't see any of the men in that photograph. So the traditional festivities of Diwali and Navratri were celebrated in a particular way and in a very traditional manner. We also have the next picture, which is a very rare picture of the eldest son of Naranji, 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲, who was actually addressing the Banyan merchants community outside the Muscat temple, which is also one of the oldest standing places of worship in Oman. And if you actually see the photograph properly, you'll actually find glimpses of the temple today as well in it. One of the other things that the family is very proud of is the possession of the first car outside of the palace. So Naranji Hirji very proudly owned the first Ford V8, which was imported from India at a very expensive price of 800 rupees. If you also notice, the car is actually a right-hand drive, and it's being driven on the other side of the road. It's a very rare picture that we actually have traffic police when there's only one car on the road. But this particular picture was taken outside the Muscat Palace gates. There is still parts of this which you can see at Muscat Palace. And if you own a car, you obviously need to have a driving license too. And this was the first driving license that was issued to the family, and any guesses who it was issued to? So that's my dad, and it was actually a hardback booklet, which there's 2 pages in it. His photograph, it mentions how much it is to actually procure a license, and it was 10 rupees to get the license issued, and 5 rupees to get it renewed. You had to take a test? A city in the desert. So we always spoke about how beautiful Oman is and how it's created, and I think we've got a lot of insight from people before who have spoken before me in terms of all the way that the whole city was created within the palace walls. But a very interesting fact I'd like to share with you, and again, I'm going to share the life hacks that used to happen. So this is one of my favorite stories which my father continues to tell everyone in terms of how would you sleep in the summers because there was no air conditioning. And he would say we would go on the roof, we would take a bed sheet, we would drench it in water, and then we'd drape it on ourselves, and every 4 hours you'd have to do that. So you would only sleep for 4 hours a day at a time. But very interestingly, the festival of Holi, which brings a lot of color, but also brings us signs of the summer. And he used to tell me saying, when it's Holi, we would know that it would be too hot, and that's why we would have to then start moving outside of the house and onto the roof to sleep. And come Diwali, we would know that it's going to start getting cooler, and that's when we actually move inside the house to sleep. So it was a very simple way of actually figuring it out in terms of how to go about with life at the time. The picture actually showcases, I think back at the far end is actually the British consulate at the time. And somewhere within there is also our house, which I'll show you in a bit as well. So commuting back in the day, and at this time, obviously, from India, Mumbai had become base for the family. But it used to be on the British Indian navigation ships, which took 4 days to arrive, just like the letter. Oman still didn't have a port for the ships to dock into. So the ships would actually come in there, but people would have to get onto smaller boats to come to shore. And that's how people and goods were offloaded and brought to and from, ferried across to the shore. I'm told the jetty was called 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲, and maybe a few of you here could sort of correct me if I'm wrong. But it's a very interesting photo of what we have in our personal archives as well. Very interesting times started in the 1970s when the power shift began and the family also started growing financially. With the positive changes that came into Oman, with His Majesty the late Sultan Qaboos bin Said coming into power, there were plenty of opportunities for everyone in Oman. The infrastructure was on a rise. There was a lot of different changes that happened. But what happened in the family is very interesting. So the family used to be all the four brothers together. Just before 1948, the third son of Naranji had moved into Karachi. But Jairam and Hansraj were running the business along with Kesavji. But in 1977, the family decided to split ways. So the two eldest sons moved back to Mumbai, and Kesavji stayed here to run the business along with his kids. So this is where it really actually started for us in Oman, as the Kesavji lineage of the family, and that's what I'll be talking about going ahead. So here's a picture of the early years in the 1970s, where Kesavji had decided to part ways, and the kids had now started taking over the business. So on the right you have Mahendra, the eldest son, and then up here you have Sudhir with Kesavji himself, and like I said, these two will always be in a photograph together. So Naru and Mahesh again in a photograph. And this is, I believe, in the office at Matra Corniche that we had. The first house that we had, this was within the city walls and in Matra. There is a stock photo and then obviously the photo that we have in our archives. So the office and the residence used to be in the same building, the office on the ground floor and the residence on the first floor. There was a staff of approximately 10 people who would obviously do everything. So a clerk would do the typing, the typist would deliver sugar bags and so on. And thankfully there was no labor inspection team at the time to stop all that happening. What happened during that time was, of course, because we had, as like I said, there were so many more opportunities that were available in Oman. The family also started diversifying into different sort of agency products, different sort of industries, and we started looking at moving away from the traditional old business that we always used to do, which was commodity trade. The second milestone that happened was in 1983, when the family was granted its Omani citizenship. And I don't know if you can read the names here, but I'll read them out for you if you want. The 12 members that were granted citizenship were Kanaksi Khimji, Pankaj Khimji, Nailesh Khimji, Anil Khimji, Ajay Khimji, Sudhir Kesavji, Mahesh Kesavji, Narendra Kesavji, Ramesh Khimji, Mulraj Dharamsi, Ashwin Dharamsi, and Bipin Dharamsi. So those were the 12 that were actually given the Omani citizenship on this particular date of 11th of August, 1983. With the citizenship, of course, came enormous opportunities for the family, because we were allowed to then own and develop land assets, and that is exactly what the family moved into. We still own and reside our office in the famous Oryx House. Most of you would know it as the Golden Oryx building, where the head office still operates out of that building. And the building was also sort of constructed with the restaurant in mind, which was also the first restaurant project for the family. Construction was one of the major fields that the family ventured into in 1983. a business that continued up to 1998. And this was, again, one of the thriving times of the growing Oman. Though, as I said, the core business still remained the commodity trade, which was the rice and sugar business. And our oldest partnership with a company is 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗲 out of Germany, supplying sugar, which has been built until today, 65 years old. So we still continue to do business with the same company. I don't know how many people from the company have actually changed and now work with us. But a very interesting fact, 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝗁𝗁's first invoice every year has to be Naranji Hirji. So on the 1st of January, it has to be Naranji Hirji to be invoiced. We also have another long-term relationship with 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗲 company, which originally are also from Kutch, but they obviously expanded into Asia, and they're based out of Thailand, who supply rice to us. We now do rice out of many different locations, mainly Punjab and both sides of the border. But we also moved into coffee, cardamom, fishing nets, accessories from Korea, and so on. This was the first shop, which was in the Matrasuk, where I still remember as a kid, my younger uncle used to sit out of there, whereas my father and the other brothers would sit out of at the office. This shop was, I think, an all-in-one sort of a shop. It did food stuff, it did fishing nets, it did everything that we could think of, everything that we sold, everything was there. I think at one time, even when we had the agency for Braun and Kenwood, there was like a mixer sitting on the shelf, and people would just come and say, I want one of those pieces, and that was the only one that we had. So this was something that we started off as our first retail business. And then came the new era. So the new era, this is not AI generated, this we've made ourselves. So in the 1990s, we saw a massive change in how we wanted to do the business. We grew into a modern infrastructure. We had various different departments apart from the commodity and the FMCG trade. And also in the 1990s, we had the introduction of the fourth generation, which is me and my cousins, enter the business, which is where a lot of things started moving forward into different areas. I spoke about Braun and Kenwood, and I would just like to touch base on that. So the first diversification from the food and the commodity business was into Braun and Kenwood. And how many of you know Braun and Kenwood here? How many of you know what they actually used to make, not what they make today? So everyone thinks that they're actually a small appliance manufacturer, right? Both companies used to make audio systems, radios, transistors, turntables, and that's where we also started with them. I still in my office have a Braun radio. It still works, and a turntable, which is so heavy. But these are the things that Braun and Kenwood used to actually make. They then moved into mixers and grinders, and our first import was actually one piece, I think, or 3 pieces. 3 pieces was our first order, which was actually our entire stock of Braun and Kenwood. And along with that, we also had Sharp. So those were the 3 brands that we actually diversified away from the food business. In 2005, the Naranji Hirji company, or the group, completed 100 years of its existence in Oman. We obviously celebrated this at the Mumtaz Mahal, which was also a part of the family's restaurants, the Mumtaz and the Golden Oryx at the time, but also brought in a lot of different change into the group. So one of the things that we also did was relaunch our our logo. And the logo now had a lot of deep meaning to it. So Naranji Hirji, the NH letters, is basically Naranji Hirji himself. And it's basically, if you drop it into water, it'll create ripples. And the 4 ripples represent the 4 generations of the company. Naranji Hirji today is run by the 7 members. Mahendra unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and today we have Sudhir, Mahesh and Naru at the top, and each of the sons basically coming into the business. One rule of the family is that no father and son work in the same department. It has to be an uncle and a nephew relationship within the department. So no nephew reports to their, or no son reports to their father, has to report to an uncle. Now it's been over 20 years that we've now been part of the business as well, but we've now have our own individual portfolios to manage. So Sudhir manages the real estate and in the investments. Mahesh still manages the commodity and the logistics. Naru manages the industrial chemicals. Samir manages the commodity, mainly the rice business. I manage the whole lifestyle and the F&B division. Nikhil manages FMCG non-food, which is our Dabur agency and health and beauty. And Devang manages the whole FMCG portfolio. Beyond this, of course, we have other brands and businesses, which I'll be talking about, and a few of us manage those as well. So again, like I said, Golden Oryx was our first diversification into restaurants, but we then moved into, 22 years ago, moved into Kamat, and I hope all of you find that as your favorite place. But we've now expanded the Kamat vegetarian restaurant chain into 3 outlets, and we also created Dawat, which is a very recent addition into the portfolio. And hopefully this is where we're going to grow within the restaurant business as well. The commodity trade has grown quite rapidly, so we still do the sugar business out of 3 partners around the world, and the rice business with about 17 brands now, but we also represent some of the top brands within the industry. With FMCG, we have a bunch of different brands from around the world, and some of the bigger names within its category, if you would recognize this as well. We are exclusive distributors of Dabur under our health and beauty product lines, and Dabur is one of the largest growing brands within its sector. It grows about 15% annually. This was something that we moved into completely new, so Easy Life, if you have, or any of you have actually been to, Easy Life is a home store which was completely sort of homegrown. It wasn't a franchise, it wasn't a partnership. We had actually started, we started from zero and we built it on our own to make it into a cash and carry store. We actually moved it around from a mall concept to a high street concept, and now we're finally settled into a cash and carry concept, and we're now moving it into a further different concept, which will be cash and carry, rentals, and hospitality. Resto Fair is a French company we partnered with 5 years ago. It is today Oman's largest cash and carry hospitality supply store. Within the industrial chemicals, we do a lot of pharmaceutical or water treatment chemicals, mainly for the food and beverage industry, and in building materials as well. And finally, just to add the MANDVI to Muscat touch to it, the family still owns a bungalow in MANDVI. That's the bungalow itself, facing the sea. And I think my generation is planning to now actually do a reunion into going there very soon. but I know my father and mother actually frequent the bungalow quite a bit. So thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Amit ji. May I now welcome Dr. Akbar Rafi to narrate the history of his late father, Dr. Syed Muhammad Rafi.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. A very good evening and a Ramadan Kareem to all of you. Your Excellency, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here at the Indian Embassy, Muscat, Oman, to present the book about my late father, Dr. Syed Muhammad Rafi. It gives me immense pleasure to present the remarkable story of my father who came to Muscat and Oman in February 1958. He dedicated his life to producing medical services to an uncharted territory that had been locked in a state of perpetual underdevelopment. Probably this is an understatement. He documented his experiences so that one day he could write a book. The slides that follow introduces him and his life. So all that what you're going to see from here are from his diaries, which he maintained. Before I proceed any further, I think this here from Khwaja Altaf Hussain Hali from the Indian subcontinent sums up my father. I will read it in Urdu first. बहुत लगता था जी सोहबत में उनके, बहुत लगता था जी सोहबत में उनके, वो अपनी जात में एक अंजुमन थे. The heart always sought his company. He was an institution unto himself. The following are my father's words from his diaries, and I quote, I graduated from Prince of Wales Medical College in Patna from the state of Bihar in India. I was very active with different committees within the college during my medical school, and you can see I was a member of the executive committee. Is there a pointer here? And you can Fantastic, that's great. Thank you very much. And you can see my dad here, Dr. Syed Muhammad Rafi. After graduation, I joined the Indian Army Medical Corps. After completing my training in AMC Center in Pune, Army Medical Corps, I was posted in Naga Hills to join the Gorkha regiment. You can see the picture of the Gorkha regiment, and my father is sitting right there. In 1956, Naga Hills district was declared a disturbed area because of the insurgency and was put under the command of the Indian Army. My mother, this is a quote from my father, my mother, my wife were very concerned because my life was in line of fire because of the insurgencies which was happening there in Naga Hills. After serving for 4 hours in the Indian Army, I decided to be discharged, asked to be discharged to a civilian position, and the permission was granted. This is a picture of one of the telegram which my father was in communication with the Minister of External Affairs, or as he was called, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Neil MacLeod Ennis in Muscat and Oman. And he confirmed my position for a posting in Sumail in 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲 region, which is about 150 miles from Muscat. That was the first clinic in Sumail to be put up. Sorry. Okay. You can see that's the signature of the Under Secretary, Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Jaswant Singh. My travel to Muscat and Oman was approved by the Under Secretary, Minister of External Affairs, His Excellency, Mr. Jaswant Singh. In 1958, I boarded the British India's steam navigation ship by the name 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝘂𝗿𝗲, which you can see there, and everybody most of the people would be aware of this ship because it was one of the most famous ships, apart from Siddhartha and Siddhana as well. Leaving behind the shores of Bombay, and you can see the contrast, what he's leaving behind and what is he heading towards to in 1958. And he arrived in the port of Muscat in February 1958. My audience, these are again the quotes, please be aware, it's not my audience, it's the audience of my father, was delayed to meet His Majesty Sayyid Taimur, Qaboos's father, Sayyid bin Taimur. Since it was delayed, I decided to travel to Nizwa to meet my brother-in-law, Dr. Sayyid Muhammad Zakiuddin. Now he is, you have to understand, he is leaving the Indian Army for a safer place where he could work more comfortably, avoiding the uncertainties which he was facing while he was serving in Naga Hills. And this is the road you can see where people used to travel from Muscat to Sumail. It would take them the whole day. They would do the journey from early morning after sunrise and would reach Sumail after sunset. The convoy started at a snail pace, passing small villages. I soon found out that I had jumped out of a fire into a frying pan. The Land Rover in front of my vehicle hit a landmine. Huge flash of light and deafening loud explosion happened. The soldiers immediately took position on the nearby hill, and we flung ourselves on the ground, quaking in our boots. That was the thunderous welcome to Oman. He is leaving for safety, and that's where he is welcomed. We don't know about the destiny. He was a man of few words, my dad, and he would not speak a lot. And when he would speak, people would listen. This is a picture of the Pembroke aircraft, which was assembled in Aden, and it would fly from Salalah through Masira and into Beit al-Falaj in Muscat. I visited my brother-in-law, Dr. Sayyid Muhammad Zakiuddin, who ran the Nizwa clinic. I stayed there for nearly 4 weeks. As I refused to return on the dangerous road, a flight was arranged for me, and the next stop is Samail. Sorry, I have to control. Go back. Yeah. Right, I think I'm there. No. Yeah, all right. No, the mic is fine. Is it a problem? Is it clear, or should I change my mic? Wear this? It's okay? Okay. Luckily, in 2016, I could visit this place, which is in Samail. And you can see in the picture, it's me standing. On my left is my wife, Dr. Shama, who's here, and my daughter on my right, who is also here in the audience. It was dark when I reached Samail. After supper, with Sheikh Khalili, I slept in his majlis with all my belongings around me. I couldn't hide my disappointment when I saw my residence cum clinic the next day. In Oman, infant mortality was high. Malaria was one of the major causes of death. Measles, chickenpox, mumps, dysentery, whooping cough, Mycobacterium tuberculosis was common. Eye problem was rampant. My total budget for 1 year, you know how much it was? Between 4 and 5,000 rupees, the currency at that time. I had to make a decision, a very difficult decision. I decided to stay. I decided to stay to help the people of Samail so that I could buy time for my patients. There are many anecdotes within the book, I must say. This is a coffee table book, which I have been privileged to present to His Excellency. And it has many anecdotes within that book. And I don't have the time, luxury of time, to go through all those anecdotes, but I'll just mention a couple of them, which may be of interest to you. I successfully treated a patient who had lost his speech, and people started believing I had some spiritual power. They started to crowd the clinic asking for some handwritten verses from the Holy Quran to wear as an amulet for protection and blessing. Eventually, I had to complain to the Wali as it was hindering my work too much. I have to mention Sheikh Hilal Al-Khalili, Sheikh Abdullah Al-Khalili, and Sheikh Saud Al-Khalili. They became a lifelong friend, and we were always there together till they all departed. And probably it was because of their affection and love and strength what they give to my dad, he stayed in Samail for 5 years. This is another anecdote from the same book. The house that I occupied, clinic cum residence, had been vacant for quite some time and had become a desirable resident for snakes, rats, and insects. One day, my houseboy entered the kitchen to prepare lunch for me. He found a large, slithering snake in the empty dish which he was about to prepare my lunch for me. After great commotions, fright, and fear, we were able to kill the resident. When the Omanis heard the news, they were very upset, and they feared some misfortune would occur to me. The Omanis believed that the snakes were the protector of the resident, and now this will bring misfortune and danger to me. Omanis called them the house guests. Yes, the misfortune did happen. My houseboy left the job after I had killed the second house resident. After serving for 5 years in Somail, I was posted in in Musna, where I served for 10 months. And Musna is about 125 kilometers from Muscat. And after serving for 10 months, my next destination was Muscat, at the Muscat Charitable Hospital run by the British Crown Services, under the guidance of British Consulate. I'm sure most of the people will remember this, and if anybody can tell me where this plaque is or where the gate is, I would be more than delighted. It is there. Maggie, you're in the audience. I think it's a good information. We'll definitely have it from you. Thank you so much. And this was the gate, as you know. In 1961, G.S.R. Duncan, the Consul General, was directed by Her Majesty, political resident, to offer me an appointment as a Chief Medical Officer at Her Majesty's Consulate General in Muscat. People would also remember this. This is the Muscat Charitable Hospital, where I worked for 7 years. It's a 20-bedded hospital. Unfortunately, it is not there. And it also had an OPD as well as accident and emergency department. As my father was looking after the quarantine medical officer, he was the medical officer for the prisons, for the leprosy, for the school, you name it, Grey Mackenzie, Mackinnon's, Mackenzie, everything, he was there. The foundation stone that was laid on the 29th of November 1909 by His Highness Sayyid Faisal bin Turki, Sultan of Muscat and Oman. Thanks God I have got a picture. If anybody knows where this plaque is, I would be very happy. Anybody can enlighten me? Please do. Well, people would know that. A lot of people from the business community would know each and every shops in there. That's the shop of Zoavi's trading, and Sayyid Qas himself used to sit there and used to sell the Sunbeam and other agencies. And I believe, if I'm not wrong, Olivetti, was it belonging to Ramnaklal Kothari or Oliviti as well. Okay, great, great. And here I think is the, yes, on the left side. You're right. And before that was the Muscat pharmacy where Mr. Mehta used to stand there. Correct. Yeah. So that's unfortunately this place is not there anymore. But thanks God I have this picture, which is very, very good. This is a picture of, now unquote, now I'm going to read it from my side. My mother and Mrs. Duncan, the Consul General's wife, is there behind the backdrop of the prison, Jalali. The two prisons were Jalali and Mirani. I never realized that Mirani was also used as a prison, which I was told by the Minister of Information. Of course, all those old people, all these old timers would know this beach. Everybody used to come to this beach before the sunset to get the cool breeze of the sea. And you can see, that's the British consulate, and of course that is the customs. And that's the Qasr al-Alam, the palace itself. Life at the British consulate in 1963. Man with a long coat and a topi. Anybody would recognize that? Sayyid Tuani bin Shahab, absolutely right, the governor of Muscat. Fantastic. Which one? This one? No, that's not Major Shanti, no. He's from the consulate itself. Anybody would recognize that? Sayyid Ibrahim, the Minister of Interior. You're right. And this is Sayyid Shahab, the governor of Muscat. Shahab bin Taimur bin Faisal bin Turki. Yeah. And this is the ambassador and his wife. Now the period of the Renaissance starts in 1970. 23rd of July in 1970, Qaboos bin Said became the Sultan of Muscat and Oman. It was still named as Muscat and Oman. In 1970, preparations were being made for the arrival of His Majesty Qaboos to Muscat from Salalah for the first time. Now this is the testing time. Let's see. This is a quote. I'm going to quote it from my father's diary, and I quote, 5 months of His Majesty's coming to reign, on 12th of December 1970, a royal decree was issued appointing me personal physician to His Majesty and on also recognizing my past services. That is the royal decree, duly signed by His Majesty Sultan Qaboos himself. He used to sign in English at that time. And you can see the seal of His Majesty and where he recognizes his services before he joined the palace. Of course, everybody knows him. Qaboos bin Said, His Majesty. Who is this person? I'm sure everybody knows about him. Absolutely correct. And his now brother, his son, Sayyid Badr, is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that's my father, Dr. Sayyid Muhammad Rafi. Do you know who this person is at the back? Anybody? People from Dharamsi family would know. Faraj, one of the slaves, although slavery was abolished immediately after His Majesty came to power. And does anybody know this gentleman? Sorry? Absolutely correct. Well done. I must applaud that. He was a major or colonel at that time, and he went on to become the General of the Royal Guards. And he was a very close friend of His Majesty, General Harcourt. Absolutely correct. This is the identity card of my father's after being appointed on the 12th of, was it November, December, 12th December 1970. And it is a handwritten ID card by His Majesty and signed by His Majesty, Qaboos. There is a very, very precious document for me, and of course the royal decree itself. So, still I quote, I traveled extensively with His Majesty in Oman and abroad. This is a picture from inside of a fort with my father, again standing there, General Harcourt himself, the senior castle guard, and His Majesty inspecting the castle itself. This is on His Majesty's yacht. Of course, by now you know everyone, but does anybody, sorry for that. Oh God. Yeah. Anyone? I need to know. Probably he's one of the persons from the Pakistan Navy. I'm not sure, but I need to reconfirm that. In 1986, 16 years after entering His Majesty's service, His Majesty Qaboos bin Said conferred the Order of Oman to me. And that's where he got the Order of Oman, which is also published in one of the book of 50 years of the embassy itself in Oman at the time of Mr. Puri. Right, I heard that word. I heard it very clearly. This is a picture of Her Majesty, Queen Mother Al-Jalila, Al-Sayyida Al-Jalila Maizoon. In addition to serving His Majesty, I was also appointed as a personal physician to Her Majesty. I have to mention this. A lot of people may be knowing her directly, but she was the finest lady till date I have met in my life, and I can stand for that. The very humble, generous, polite, loving, caring lady. She was an institution, I would say, on her own. Of course, during His Majesty's time, Princess Diana visited the Sultanate and of course had an audience with Her Majesty along with her husband. That's Bibi Maizoon herself, which we used to call her Maizoon, Bibi Maizoon, but it was Sayyida Jalila Maizoon. That's Prince Charles, now the King of England, with Her Majesty, Sayyida Maizoon. I could go on and on and on, but obviously there's a time limit and I need to respect that. My mother passed away. This is my mother and my father. This is a very emotional story, and this was one of the reasons which I had to decided to write the book on my dad. My mother passed away in February 2009, leaving behind my father after 60 years of marriage. His death was the saddest moment in my life, in my father's life, and of course for us as well. My father was blinded for 10 years before he passed away in the last 10 years of his life because of a very rare eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa. If some of the medics are here, they would know about that. With age, he suffered from a memory loss. For us, our mother passed away once. But for my father, she passed away 1,000 times because he would forget. Every time when he asked, "Where is Saida?" we would say that she had passed away, and he would cry profusely. And after half an hour or 1 hour, he'll ask again. And then when we tell him, that was the first time he's hearing it now, because he forgot. And he would start crying profusely again. This continued for 6 months before he could come over this trauma and tragedy. When she passed away, he calls me and he says, "Son, can you put a nice big portrait of your mother so that I can see her?" Now this is coming from a person who cannot see. He requests a radio as a companion. After 60 years, she left him. So he wanted a companion. He asked for a radio. He never asked for anything. And in our religion, Islam, we don't concrete the graves. Preferably, we don't. And he was very particular that not to concrete the grave, just put an epitaph of a stone so that he can see it. All these are coming from a person who has been blinded for 10 years. And that was the time I had to say, yes, I have to write the book. Before I end my talk, I have to narrate this from Majruh Sultanpuri, an eminent Urdu poet from the Indian subcontinent. तुम्हें कहता है मुर्दा कौन, तुम्हें कहता है मुर्दा कौन, तुम जिंदों के जिंदा हो, तुम्हारी नेकियां बाकी, तुम्हारी खूबियां जिंदा. Who says you are not alive? You are more alive than the living. Your goodness remains and your righteousness thrives. This is not it is the end of my talk, but I have to mention this, that I am very proudly standing here after the completion of the book and after the launch of the book, Your Excellency. I managed to give this book to His Majesty Sayyid Haytham bin Tariq, Sultan Haytham bin Tariq. He was just like a son to my father, and he recognizes and acknowledges his services before joining His Majesty Sultan Qaboos bin Said and serving his mother for his services to the medical fraternity in Oman. And I am very proud of this, because this is an icing on the cake of the book which we have written. Last but not the least, I would like to extend my thanks to the Indian Embassy Muscat for hosting me and organizing this wonderful event at their prestigious institution. His Excellency the Ambassador, Mr. Amit, and Mrs. Madam Divya. Mr. Amol, I wouldn't not mention him actually. He has been very helpful and kind, and of course Sangeeta as well. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, for lending me your ears. If anybody wants to ask any questions, I'll be more than delighted if I can answer.
Thank you, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have with us Mr. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗲, the artist who painted the beautiful paintings displayed in the embassy reception. He has come all the way from Australia with a beautiful painting of the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi, with His Majesty Sultan Haitham bin Tariq, which was photographed during His Majesty's state visit to India. May I kindly invite His Excellency Ambassador Amit Narang to the stage. May I also request Mr. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗲 to come to the stage and present the painting to His Excellency the Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝗁𝗁. I kindly request you to stay back on the stage for a photograph. May I now request our esteemed speaker of the day, Mr. Swagat Pani, to come to the stage. Sorry, before that, 1 minute. We also have I kindly request Ambassador to present a token of appreciation from the embassy to Mr. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝗁𝗁. Thank you, 𝗟𝗲𝗁𝗁. May I now request Mr. Swagat Pani to come to the stage to receive a token of appreciation from the Ambassador. I also request Mr. Amit Sampath to kindly come to the stage to receive a token of appreciation from the Ambassador. May I now request Dr. 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗲 to come to the stage to receive a token of appreciation from our Ambassador. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. As we draw towards the conclusion of our formalities, I invite you all to join us for a dinner outside. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you who joined us this evening. Thank you.